Hi everyone, Brennan here from Richardson and Wrench Projects, and welcome to another webinar giving you some really good insight into the short-term rental market with a particular highlight on Melbourne, why Melbourne, then drilling on down further into a particular suburb that we absolutely love for investors, and then a particular project that we have some really good opportunity for investors to get involved with for the purpose of short-term rental due to its location, and also features some really good incentives. So a really exciting webinar to help investors understand all about short-term rental and then highlight a property that makes really good sense, not just for the cash flow that this short-term rental can generate, but it's also a really strong growth property opportunity. And that's what's so important in the market today, to actually be hitting both of those fronts. No longer can we really just focus on growth and sacrifice a rental return and have substantial holding costs, or vice versa. No longer can we just focus on really strong gross rental returns and go to inferior marketplaces like really regional areas and sacrifice our growth concepts. So that's what we're going to delve into tonight. Your presenter, Brennan Latimer. I've been working in the Australian residential real estate industry, specifically around the investment side of the industry for 10 years. And working across a range of property markets and property types, from houses and custom designs, small developments, units, townhouses, from west coast to east coast. It's been a really good learning curve to put us in a position today here at Richardson and Wrench Projects to work with people like MadeComfy, which is one of the biggest growing short-term rental groups in the country, and highlight some ideal properties that make the most sense for investors. So as I said, we're going to hear from MadeComfy. They're not with me today, unfortunately. We did this presentation a couple of weeks ago, which is very well received from everyone in the room. But MadeComfy have put together some slides just to outline all about the short-term rental market, who they are, what they do, and the kinds of gains that investors can get when they focus on this style of property investing, which is a really exciting market to explore in a changing area of real estate here in Australia. I'm then going to delve into the state of the Melbourne market, realize and focus on a particular suburb, and then really highlight a particular property, which is an amazing opportunity to generate circa 10,000 plus in year one for positive cash flow with short-term rental. But not only that, it's in an absolutely unreal location in Melbourne, which is going to see some really good sustained future growth, and I'll go into exactly how. So MadeComfy, you might have seen they feature in magazines all the time and often feature in the news actually as well. A couple of years old and been growing from strength to strength, opening in new areas around the country and getting more and more managements under their belt, focusing specifically on the short-term rental market. They saw a gap in the industry between people wanting to rent out their properties to get the most and the highest and best use, but they're not really being much servicing for that outside of doing it yourself or doing long-term traditional rental management. So they started the company, and it's grown from just a few members to now 70 plus members around Australia, with offices opening up. So they're managing more than 600 properties, and it's growing week by week. So the Australian short-term rental market is a really interesting one. It's something that in the last year or two has really just absolutely skyrocketed in terms of interest and the attractiveness of it due to the kind of cash flows that some people can get. Ultimately, it just refers to the ability of people to rent their investment properties out, or potentially even their own homes, and really undertake just short-term agreements or leases with people that often is at a much higher rent per week than you would get on a long-term basis. And the short-term rental way that investors can utilize the property to the highest and best use, in some instances sees returns up to 40% more than what they would otherwise be able to get in the long-term market. Now, MadeComfy, as I said, has come about just in the gap between people having to do Airbnb management themselves, which is really quite time-consuming and difficult, and then also therefore having a specialized management group to help you and assist you in managing your property for short term. So where does this all come about from? Short-term rental most capital cities, there's arguably a bit of a shortage at the moment in hotels. We see that in some pockets of Melbourne, Brisbane, and Sydney. And when they're at full capacity, where can people go? What can people do? And as you can see there, we've had nearly a 50% increase in the last few years of international and visitors. So simply put, the hotels can't keep up. And if you're from Sydney, you'll understand that there's a couple under construction at the moment, but they're not really going to be coming to the market until 2022, 2023. So, and then they still won't satisfy all of the demand from this, huge rate of growth that we're seeing in international visitors. So, there's a real cry and a real demand for this short-term styled letting for holidaymakers, people, visiting family, people traveling interstate for work, or people traveling interstate for fun as well. I know I personally, when I travel with my girlfriend, first point of call is to check out the Airbnb space and see if we can get a nice relaxed property instead of going into a pretty chaotic hotel as well. So it's definitely something, it's just a bit of a change of the tides coming through, a bit of a disruption in the industry. And as things and demographic shifts and trends change, this is something that is really at the forefront of affecting real estate at the moment and what investors can do. So some of the graphs, the growths you can see there in the stats and the graph is 6% year-on-year growth. Visiting family and friends versus holidays. So not everyone's just coming for a holiday. There's a lot more people visiting. As we start to head to such more globalization around the world, people are easily able to travel compared to what they used to be. And now people just visiting family for a few days on an international basis is much more common than it was 10, 20 years ago because of the ease of access. People can work afar and all sorts of things, which is really encouraging this quick trade economy and shared economy sort of thing. So it's amazing to see that the context around where short term can come from, and it's absolutely staggering to see that it's gone up by 50% in the last 6 years. That's amazing numbers. If that kind of trajectory, you can imagine in another 4 to 6 years, what kind of numbers we'll be looking at of increasing international visitors. The Melbourne short-term rental market is one we wanted to focus on. Interstate visitors increased to 5.4 million. You can see there the rental growth has really, really increased from 2014 as short-term rentals became a bit of a thing. And it's been on a general trajectory since August 16 in the right direction. Obviously with some peaks and troughs of summer and winter seasons, which is very normal in the short-term market. Visitor nights grew to reach 67.4 million, an increase of 14.6%. But you know what? Listing numbers are increasing as more people get savvy in this space. And that's why it's so important what I'm here to do today to help you outline what type of property you can get the best results from for short-term rentals as well. The Sydney short-term rental market has been absolutely massive for some people. Now, people who got into the market in areas like Pyrmont and things like that, for instance, near the International Convention Centre, it's been an absolute hotbed of activity and really, really good cash flow results for them. But that being said, for that investor looking to do the same thing today, prices have risen really, really drastically over the last boom here in Sydney, which A, makes the real estate for the most part unobtainable and unaffordable. And then B, it's actually drastically contracted the returns available for the short-term rental market as well. So those gross rental returns and that cash flow that you're getting as an investor looking in Sydney today is not really there and not as supportive as what it once was, which begs us to question, where else can I go that A, is going to get me good growth, like what we've seen in Sydney potentially, and B, is in the right location, the right spot for me to utilize short-term rentals. You can't just pick anywhere. You've got to be really selective about the property type and the location. Put yourself in the tenant's shoes of where they want to go. So that leads me to how to choose a short-term rental investment. It's all about location. You really need to understand where the property is, what it benefits from, what's around it, is access to amenity, easy pubs, wine bars, restaurants, entertainment, lifestyle factors, and then also transport. If none of that's around, and sadly we hear of some people buying properties willy-nilly and then coming for support around the short-term rental market, and sadly the the substance of that apartment doesn't, or that townhouse does not support doing short-term rentals, and can damage therefore the investor's portfolio and their strategy and what they're going to do for their next property maybe. So really encourage everyone to think like a guest and look at the real estate as if you were renting, and why would you want to rent there, which is what's really important. So the property I'm talking about later on today, why it makes sense, it's got a walk score of 99%, which is basically perfect. So an amazing, well-connected property. You've also got to work with groups who know what they're doing to manage your property. And if you're undertaking it yourself, make sure you do the right amount of research and understand pricing and all the data that's there in the market. Check all the comparables, check what types of seasonal activity there is. And there's been a bit of a trend away from this Airbnb market, or short-term market, where people were buying holiday premises and focusing there because there was a lot of pain during off seasons. So that's why now, when we can get good locations in the CBD, close to work, close to lifestyle, close to amenity and entertainment, they're going to do a bit better than that holiday letting style thing as well. But it's all about location. And that's why when here in Sydney, we're talking about the opportunities available, location being so key. Sadly, those prices for such well-located real estate are absolutely up in the ether at the moment, and that's contracted the rents for us. So what do we need to look for? 1 and 2 bedroom units or apartments are the most popular, close to public transport, event centers, hospitals, stadiums, entertainment, as I mentioned, balanced seasonality, steering away from the holiday letting that's only going to be popular for 4 months of the year, 5 months of the year, and then you're really struggling for the balance of the year. And then, where there's some good high short-term rental demand, you can analyze that by speaking to other people and actually just gauging the traction of other properties on the market. Otherwise, groups like MadeComfy, this is their one and only profession. They can help you understand a market, exactly how much real estate's available there in the short-term space, what kind of rents you can expect, what kind of costs will be incurred to give you the best result. And what to avoid is, basically the opposite. Is it going to rent for only 4 months of the year? Low short-term rental demand. Is there enough demand actually for people wanting to do short-term stay there? And then also buildings where there's managed concierges as well. A lot of new real estate, which is what we want to focus on as Airbnb, as short-term investors, we want to focus on the new real estate market because that gives us a point of difference beyond the investor or homeowner who's renting their place out for 3 weeks and it's an older second-hand property and second-hand furniture that's been lived in. The point of difference is in the new space, new furnishings, new real estate to give us the best edge on the market. Now, sadly, most brand new buildings of high caliber in these types of 99% walk score locations have managed concierges, which drastically restricts or completely cuts off the ability to do short-term rental. So where we can get the property right, typically has to be quite a boutique complex, you can get some good short-term availability for us. So you can see here the types of pockets we want to look at in Melbourne, inner city precinct there in Melbourne, where there's a lot more supply and a little bit more competition as well. But then there's some outer ring pockets, your Yarras, your Prime, Richmond, Collingwood, and Fitzroy, which we're going to talk about later, which actually really hit the mark quite well as well for short-term rentals. So you need to be in that kind of radius. So if you go down to suburbs that are 20 kilometres away and get Airbnb, do short-term, it's really just not going to hit the mark for you. So here's some case studies from the MadeComfy team of some real-time investors they're managing their properties for. This is the suburb of St Kilda, which I'm sure many of you know, very, very popular seaside location, close proximity to Melbourne CBD. This is an apartment with 2 bedrooms. And you can see there the gross income for the long-term weekly rent is around $600 a week. Then the gross short-term rental there is increased by circa 50% by the MadeComfy crew as well. So even after taking out the management fees by MadeComfy, we're looking at drastically increased net incomes. $575 per week after management costs when you do long-term, or $738 per week going in your pocket when we do the short-term rental amount. So it's a 28% higher net income. And that's huge. What that means for us as an investor is so, so important. That extra 28% is going to help us, invest elsewhere if we're being smart about it as an investor, or potentially we can absolutely just pump that money back into the asset or into the offset account to then compound our ability to reduce the amount payable on the property and pay it down faster. So that's how we have the ability, and what this short-term rental can do for us is help us, reach a quicker amortization of the loan than otherwise we could with the long-term property. So if we can get the growth plus this concept going, it's an absolute winner for investors. Another case study is a one-bedroom unit in Fitzroy. Amazing part of town. It's basically, think of the Surrey Hills of Melbourne if you're not familiar with it. Really cool, funky part of town, 1.3 kilometers from the CBD, walking distance. We can see here, amazing result of 53% higher net income than the long-term rental market. So an amazing result there, and as you can see, that's just a pretty basic older one-bedroom apartment with some pretty eclectic furniture in there. So when we're talking about new real estate, that's where we can get a bit of an edge and get the result that we want as well. So as I said, these are the kinds of the radius that you'd want to explore when looking at any sort of short-term market here in Sydney. But as I said, from Rose Bay to Newtown to St Leonard's, like, we're talking about prices that are astronomical at the moment, and the short-term rentals really just aren't there to support making that move, basically. But the MadeComfy team, if you already own real estate in that precinct, the MadeComfy team are the guys to talk to understand, does your property suit what kind of rents you can get and what kind of costs are going to be incurred to help you get a better result from your assets. So, if you've got properties in Sydney, I wouldn't suggest looking for new ones if you're an investor. But if you've got stuff, the MadeComfy team can help you out. Here's one example in Pyrmont. As I said, this probably was an older property which allowed this person to get such a drastically boosted return. But there's a lot more competition coming into play in that market at the moment, and that kind of real estate would be north of $1 million to secure, so it's tough work for investors. But again, we can see there 83% higher net income than long-term rental. So that's an amazing result for that investor. That would really be hugely, tens of thousands positive cash flow for that property investor. So exactly what we want. As I said, think like a guest. The importance of photography is massive. We can look at all those examples there that are really going to help a property stand out. If you've got a tired, old-looking property with old furniture, it's a dark, dim-lit room, it's not very good photography, you've taken it yourself on your iPhone, the competition you're up against, are you going to get the result? So thinking like a guest, the reviews are really important. It's got to be furnished well, styled. Choose a good MadeComfy group that can help you do all of this and deliver a great service. So yeah, it's about the pictures, the description, the reviews, and that's what the MadeComfy team can help you get all of this stuff together to make sure you get the right result. As I said, pictures, you can see here, this was actually in the same suburb, the same property type of unit, and you can see here the older one with the ordinary photos, 48 night, the newer one with some good furnishings and really a nice attractive photos, $210 a night. So the proof's in the pudding that if you need to put the effort in up front and you get the result, basically. So the MadeComfy guys, when you speak to them, they can go into more detail about their company and what they can offer you and the services aligned with using them for short-term rentals. But you can see here, this is the kind of projections that you can get and the historical data analysis that you can get when they analyze your property for you and its ability for short-term rentals. So you can understand month by month the kind of vacancy you're going to expect, or any sort of information in the market at the moment. I think something they're working on at the moment, the next step for them, which is a month or two away, is actually, with all the data they have, they can do a bit of forecasting for you as well. So you can actually plan ahead for your investment property, which is, real next level investor stuff for us. They've taken it to the point of they've got an in-house analyst, used to work for one of the big banks. So they've got a really professional team focusing solely on this. And, us investors looking at real estate, we're too time poor to do that kind of thing. So these guys are great to help take that workload off you and get you the best result. What they can also tell you about is all the changes that are coming in this short-term rental space. It's pretty hotly contested. Some people for it, some people against it, some councils implementing restrictions and so on and so forth, which I understand for the most part has been scrapped. There's new legislations coming through to New South Wales restricting how long it can be done for short-term rentals. But yeah, it's definitely something that the MadeComfy team can go into with you in a lot more detail to understand the implications of the legislation on your property. But it is very important. It would be nothing worse than buying a property with all the intention of doing short-term rental and understanding that the complex isn't right and so on and so forth. So yeah, it's really, really important to understand the rules and regulations around it. So if you're interested in having a chat with the MadeComfy team to assess a property that you currently own and what they can do for you and the potential of it, then you want to have a chat with the MadeComfy team. You can be connected via us. Otherwise, please feel free to contact them directly, www.madecomfy.com.au, or give them a buzz on 1-800-526-133. Really good, vibrant team, offices across the 3 main capitals will be able to help you out with any questions that you have. Which leads me to the next part of the webinar, dissecting Melbourne and why for investors right now it makes really, really good sense to be focusing on. As we know, we've seen what's happened here in Sydney. The last 5 to 6 years has been astronomical in terms of growth, double-digit growth per year for the last 5 consecutive years. And we're starting, and it's pretty evident we've reached the ceiling of what the market can pay. And that's what's leading us now to a little bit of flatlining or correction in some areas, which, depending upon which economist you talk to, may hang around for quite some time until incomes catch up and lending policies change. So where else can we diversify to get the next best results and hopefully replicate what we saw here in Sydney? And one of them that's screaming for value orientation and sensible investment at the moment is Melbourne. So Melbourne is expected to crack a population of 8 million people by 2051, which is just unreal. And why it's so important to look at this, and you'll be amazed by the prices that I talk to you about later, but a lot of people, when they think of Melbourne, have just written it off automatically as investors because they think the prices are side by side that of Sydney's, and it's just not the case. But with the pressure that's coming, the prices are going to go up, especially in the unit market and the affordability end of the scale and in good locations where people want to live. The prices from this pressure of population growth are going to start creeping up real hard and real fast as well. So massive amounts of populations projected, need 1.6 million new homes in that time to support that population, and 1.7 million jobs forecasted. As a matter of fact, by 2030, the population growth being so strong at the moment, the forecasts are actually showing it to overtake Sydney and become our largest capital city in as little as the next 12 to 15 years. So we're talking about, astronomical exponential growth. And that begs the question of where is everyone going to live? So what I like to take a look at is now, the next few slides are all about the stats. Love it or hate it, it is important to get some contextual understanding of the numbers in the market there. But what I love to look at is you can see since 2013 we started to get some upward trajectory in property prices across the Melbourne market. And different to Sydney, why I like it is because we're not looking at figures of 17, 18s, 19s, which were just massive. We've got 10, 6, 11, 13, 11, and now it's been a much more flatline growth, especially in the housing market, realistically only in the housing market for the last little while in Melbourne as well alongside Sydney. But it hasn't been stupid growth, and it leaves a lot of room for advantageous investors as well. We can see there the median nearly at 1.8 or down a little bit recently for Sydney, but we can see there that Melbourne, $880,000 median house price, which is amazing, right? We're talking about a $200,000 parity between the two, yet we know Melbourne is going to overtake Sydney in the next 12 to 15 years. Begs to ask the question, how quickly is that gap between the two cities going to close off the back of Melbourne's growth? Same sort of story in the median unit prices, a staggering 700,000 plus for the median of units in Sydney alone. And then we've got a much more realistic, nearly, again, 200,000 shy in the Melbourne unit space again. And that's why it's so attractive, and that's why that population has been so strong, the growth, because it's a world city. Jobs are on the increase, lifestyle's fantastic, And people interstate are wondering, why am I doing the rat race here in Sydney? Let's make the move to Melbourne, and my lifestyle is going to increase tenfold. I've got X amount of money to put back towards saving for investing, saving for my home, saving for my lifestyle, and that's what's pulling people both interstate and internationally into the market. So we can say the same sort of thing here in rents, but what's interesting is if you take a look at the medians of prices in Sydney, the subsequent rents, we're talking about like 2.5% to 3% gross returns. But if we take the medians there of Melbourne's and the subsequent rents, it's much stronger kinds of rental returns as well. Vacancy rates, and I love showing this stat as well. I mean, one of the main things we always get from some skeptics in the market is around oversupply in Melbourne. And look, like most pockets of Australia that the government earmarked for getting strong population growth, there was a lot of residential supply. The government understood people are coming, they're going to be coming to these areas because they're well connected and there's a lot of stuff around. So let's change the height limits or change the zoning. And that saw over the last few years a lot of supply come on through to the market in certain pockets, which, at the end of the day, over the long term is needed. Otherwise, we end up with even worse growth problems and vacancy tightness issues, which causes massive panic in the market and things like that. But what we're starting to see now is a slowdown in the level of supply, realistically across the whole country as the market cools. So traditionally over the last few years, international investing was strong, interstate investing was so strong, interest rates at 50+ year lows. The market was conducive for buying activity, so developers were developing. Now it's spun on its head and things have slowed down. Lending's a bit harder. Developers are waiting until the next sort of cycle in the market. Otherwise, most developers, sadly, they can't get finance to do the development. So supply is really now falling off a cliff across the capital cities in the most part, and certain areas are better than others for tightness of supply, which I'm going to delve into later. But you can see there across the board in Melbourne, 1.4% vacancy rate, which is tight. And you can imagine your local area in Sydney quite tight, 2.2. So when we talk about the right pockets in Melbourne, it's really, really tight. And that's helping increase rents for smart investors as well. As we've touched on, record net migration for the market, putting good growth pressures on household production and jobs, and some of the biggest infrastructure investment from local and state and national governments taking place in Melbourne at the moment. So traditionally, it was always sort of said, you go to Sydney, we get the property prices are more expensive, but I can get a higher paying job there to cater for that higher price. And it's really not the case anymore. Even the likes you can see there in Brisbane. As industries improved over the last decade and so, we've seen the job market drastically improve and incomes improve. So when we talk about Melbourne and Sydney as an example here, the incomes are pretty much neck and neck, yet we just showed you in the earlier slide the drastic parity between the median prices. So compared to Sydney, Melbourne is by no means, across the board for most parts, stress tested in terms of affordability. Now what that means for us as investors is there's an opportunistic gap that we can see some more growth in. Sydney, why it needed to slow down and why it's happening in conjunction with lending constraints was also the fact that incomes were not supporting the kind of growth we were seeing here in the market. Where that happens, you don't get growth. Where there is the ability and the incomes to support more price growth on properties, we will get that growth in conjunction with the demand increasing on the property. And Melbourne is one of those markets right now, especially in certain pockets where we can get some units in top locations. The unit cycle is really just starting to come into play in there. So Melbourne, as I mentioned, contrary to popular belief, is actually one of the most undersupplied markets in the country at the moment, and the forecasts are looking pretty grim. You speak to a lot of professionals down in Melbourne, understanding there's 100,000 plus people per annum moving to the city to call it home. If we have a period of just 6 months where the supply is 25% of what it once was, that's going to ripple into a shortfall of properties produced in 18, 24 months time when the properties will be completed and built. Now, if we have a period of just 6 to 12 months of such a drastic slowdown in supply, in 2.5 years, we might be facing a real problem of an actual shortage of supply. And that's where rents start to skyrocket and vacancy can be zero in some instances. So it's not necessarily a good thing. It's good for us investors getting into the market now. But if it's too drastic, we can see some pretty scary vacancy issues appear. So just recapping on the Melbourne market, interest rates on hold for now is our prediction for most economists and beyond into next year. Obviously, the banks are taking it upon themselves to increase rates a little bit in the last little while, but what we need to still think about is the fact that we're still talking about 50+ year, the cost of money. So it's still a good time to be investing and maybe fixing those rates, for instance. The local economy in Melbourne's continuing to strengthen, just recently kicking New South Wales off the top of the chart in terms of our biggest state-based economy. So it's leading the charge here in Australia, and record migration is expected to continue, and affordability is a huge key factor. We can go to locations close to the city, top popular locations, and be paying half or even a third of the cost of the real estate here in Sydney. So it's really attractive. Housing supply is struggling to keep up with the demand. First home buyers are active in the market because it's affordable, and the demand for unit living, because of the unit's affordability, their proximity to functional lifestyle locations and jobs, is really starting to surge, and we're starting to see some good price rises on the right unit real estate. In the Melbourne market, we love the north, northeast, and in some parts, the western suburbs. We see it's the best value, the best suburbs with limiting constraints around supply, and the best demographics to get good gains on our properties. Understanding why Melbourne makes sense, I wanted to take another step further, go in deeper and get a bit more micro and look at a particular suburb. And of course, you probably picked up by now, I want to reference Fitzroy. For those of you who don't know, I'm sure many of you have been to Fitzroy. It's probably one of the top foodie spots and hangout spots for interstate visitors to go and check out because of it's such a funky, popular part of town, eclectic bars, night spots, restaurants, really popular market. As I said, its best representative here in Sydney is the likes of, say, Darlinghurst and Surrey Hills. The landscape looks the same, the demographic is the same. And that's why we see it moving forward, having the same kind of pressure and growth characteristics, which has been absolutely insane over the last 5 years here in Surrey Hills. So what I want to talk about first is the importance of walk score and how it can get you cash flow as an investor. If you take a look at Sydney and Melbourne, our two major global cities, 1 million office workers, home to all our top ASX listed companies. And what's interesting to note is across both cities, there's really only about a dozen suburbs that are actually walking distance to the CBD. So they're rare. Suburbs in walking distance to the CBD are rare. And then you can cut half of those out because some are just not sensible for investors to look at because of prices. And otherwise, some of them are oversupplied, leaving us with only really about a dozen suburbs to look at, if that. So taking a look at Sydney here, I just wanted to do a bit of a pricing comparison. Knowing that Melbourne's going to be our biggest capital city, let's think about these prices. Walking distance to Sydney, Pyrmont, median unit price, $1 million. Milsons Point, just across the bridge, 1.53. Kirribilli, 1.39. The Rocks, 1.35. Surrey Hills, I'm a bit skeptical of that. I think it would be a little bit higher. Median unit price of $900,000, and they're in Haymarket, $860,000. Some crazy prices to be thinking of there in the medians. Haymarket and Surrey Hills got a lot of one-bedroom units, which is helping keep that median down compared to like Kirribilli and Milsons and Pyrmont. But we're talking about some pretty crazy prices. Now let's jump through to Melbourne. You can see already, we're talking about figures for the most part that are half. West Melbourne, 562. Docklands, we don't really necessarily want to focus there because of oversupply at the moment. South Melbourne, same sort of story in most parts of South Melbourne, 600 grand though. East Melbourne, interesting. East Melbourne is per square metre the most expensive suburb in Melbourne, literally one of the top suburbs in Australia, the whole of Australia. But there aren't many units there, full stop. So we don't have too many units to actually have making up that median price there. Because the median house price in East Melbourne is north of $2.5 million. North Melbourne, 500K. And then Fitzroy, which is our favorite, 680K. You can see it's a little bit higher than those other ones, but that's because it's such a tightly held market. There is no supply, and that's in conjunction with it being, out of all those there, the most popular pocket for people to be looking at to either rent or buy to live as well at the moment. And what does a walk score do? What can happen to real estate that is a walking distance to the CBD? As I said, let's think in 10 years' time where Melbourne is home to another 1 million people, what kind of pressure we can be expecting on a suburb like Fitzroy that's A, popular, and B, close to all the amenity lifestyle that everyone wants, and C, walking distance to the city. Everyone's going to want to live there. Everyone's going to want to buy there. And then we can end up with scenarios like this. A 1-bedroom studio apartment in Shibuya in Tokyo, $950 a week. Greenwich Village in New York, $1,750 a week. I've converted these from the local currency to Australian for the sake of this webinar, but you can see $1,750 a week for 1 bed. They get sneaky with their marketing there over in the States, obviously. You've got 2 rooms, but it's actually just, referring to the living dining room there. So it's a 1-bedroom property. $1,750 a week is what people are paying. So unbelievable amounts of money. When we have the right boiling pot of pressures in the market, that's what people are willing to pay to be close to lifestyle and jobs. Covent Garden in the UK, this is a 2-bedroom property, $1,950 a week. So some insane amounts of money that people are willing to pay to be in these locations. And that's going to come to the market there in Melbourne, whether we like it or not, as it turns into even more of a fully fledged global city and starts to overtake the likes of Sydney. Surrey Hills is a good benchmark for Fitzroy. We can see here that over time, rents drastically increase in those locations. So in 2011, this unit was bought for $655,000. Now at the time, it would have been renting for around about a 4.5-5% gross rental return. This is just before the last boom here in Sydney, so smart buying from this person. But the rental there would have been 600 to 600 plus a week, roughly, giving about that 5% gross return. So for the investor that bought 7 years ago, what does the rent look like today as the market has been hammered and increased? Well, in July of this year, that same property, 133, is renting for $1,000 a week. And you can see there that it rented in the middle of the year in July for $1,000 a week, which is generally a tougher time to rent properties in the market. Whereas in January of this year, it rented for $1,100 a week. So again, if that property comes up to rent probably at the end of this year, we can expect it to get $1,100 a week again. So we're talking about, a near 10% gross return for the 2011 investor. And that property today is worth circa 1.25 million potentially upon it, depending upon its level of finish and everything like that. But so we can see the kind of growth we can expect, and we can see, because of that location and that walkability, we can see the pressure that we can get on the rental market, which is just astronomical. So these properties, if you're a smart investor buying in the right spot today, properties today in 5 to 10 years time can turn into absolute cash cows for you. And it's all about reference to what's referred to as a place economy. There's hundreds of suburbs in each city for the most part, but only a select few of those suburbs are actual places that are social, they have uses and activities, they have comfort and come with an associated positive image, reflective design of people aspiring to live there, and have good access and linkages, not only to amenity and entertainment, but to jobs as most importantly. And Fitzroy is a place economy. Who lives in place economies? People with punishing workloads because they need to be close to everything. People with punishing jobs typically are the ones that are the demographic we love. High-paying jobs, they're there to live and to play, and they're basically like hospitals and doctors and lawyers. They're there to sleep and then they're out. So it's the ideal kind of tenant for us to have as well. So that's the type of person that's living in these place economies, the exact demographic we want. Type of place economy here in Sydney, Bondi. Everyone wants to be there, wants to live there. It's relatively close to the city for jobs, or Bondi Junction for jobs. And that's why we now know what kind of prices and rents can be expected in the market there. Even on back streets of Bondi, looking at 2-bedroom older properties, we're talking about rents up to $1,200 a week, and that may or may not be with a car park. So it's astronomical growth happening in that market. Surrey Hills, again, is a great reference. You can see here Surrey Hills markets, another example of a place economy. Close to the city, people want to play there, live there, and they work there, and or work there in some of the new boutiques and graphic designs and studios that are opening up in Surrey Hills, or in the CBD as well. So taking a look at Fitzroy, this is the kind of environment you can see from the images just why it's such a good reference to the likes of Darlow or Surrey Hills here in Sydney. Really eclectic stores around the place, attracting that sort of designer lifestyle, trendy double income, no kids demographic into the suburb. Really heavy into the arts, the pop-up stores, a lot of older industrial sheds that have heritage implications are transformed into beautiful properties and beautiful, retail or foodie outlets and things like that as well. So, and that's why it's pulling people into the area. Every week there's a new cafe, restaurant, wine bar popping up, and it's becoming more and more popular in the local market. Downsizers are flooding into the area. First home buyers are flooding into the area. Small families, it's not uncommon in these kinds of pockets with 2-bedroom units to have small families living in them, all centrally pulling into this market, and that's where we're getting our growth. Typical kind of terrace housing you can expect to see in the Fitzroy market, and a lot of this stuff is heritage listed, which is a brilliant point to note about this suburb for those of you fearing supply, because what it does is drastically reduce what kind of development and how much development can actually come into the area. So let's talk about pre-construction real estate and 7 key ways of this deal that I'm going to talk about in Fitzroy can make you money. That's what we're here to talk about. How will this investment property make me money? The first most important thing to check out is, and what's really rare in looking at new real estate today, is the ability to actually be buying new real estate at prices matching or less than second-hand sales actually taking place in the market. So we can see there, 1-bed, 1-bath, 1-car, 571,000 sold in March this year. Another one in September this year, 567,500. They're older, much older, inferior, second-hand apartments on equivalent streets in the exact same suburb to the project that I'm going to show you now, where we can secure designer, brand new 1-bed, 1-bath, 1-car properties from 469,000. Starting to make sense, right? Then the second point is how we're going to get benefit from the ripple effect of suburbs like East Melbourne. So top, skip and a jump, the neighbouring suburb is East Melbourne to Fitzroy. And I wanted to show an example. There's one of the most famous strata complexes in Melbourne, which looks over Fitzroy Gardens. It's in East Melbourne. It's called 150 Clarendon. And you can see some of the most high and record-setting prices achieved in this complex for strata titled units. And that's just about 1 kilometre away from Fitzroy, or less than 1 kilometre from the site that I'm going to show you of this new project. So what you can start to understand is the prices that we're surrounding ourselves with are getting so expensive. And as people aspire to be in these locations, it's only natural that over time the conversation will turn from, I want to be in East Melbourne, I have to be in East Melbourne, to, geez, East Melbourne's so expensive. But look at Fitzroy, which has got all the same amenity, all the same connectivity, it's in the same proximity, it's an up and coming, amazing, popular suburb, but it's this much. And that's where the attention and the pull starts to go into those neighbouring suburbs. It's called the ripple effect, and it's a really good strategy, a classic strategy for investors to look at. Here's a sale late last year in that building, 150 Clarendon, 1-bed, 1-bath, 1-car, $1.6 million. It was a big, beautiful 1-bedroom apartment with views over Fitzroy Garden, but the idea is just to understand the kinds of money that people are wanting to pay to be in these locations. So I just talked about properties in this new project of ours, 469 to 540,000 for 1-bed, 1-bath, 1-cars. A staggering kind of pressure we can expect from the ripple. Another neighbouring suburb, Carlton North, we can see there, older red brick art decos without even a garage, 595 in May of last year. Another one in September of this year, an older, absolutely basic looking property, 530,000. So again, less than or equal to prices we're paying for designer brand new units in the neighboring suburb. So we can expect that ripple to come on through as people make that same thought. Carlton North, well, you know what? Fitzroy is just as good. It's probably more popular at the moment. Look at what I can get there. Pressure on that end of the market, more growth. The right demographic, as I touched on, your property will be able to be taken to auction and will be selling to double income, no kids, dinks, or downsizers, or potentially some first home buyers as well in the one bedroom space that we're going to talk about later. This is the exact demographic we want. Without all of those at play, your buyer pool into the future is not strong enough to support growth. Well, we've got good competition, good demand, a couple of pools and buyer types. We are going to get growth on our property. You can see here is just a recent article. Baby boomers set up empty nests in Fitzroy and Collingwood. So we can see that they're actually trading in, the big house in the suburbs and moving for activity-based lifestyles closer to the CBD, close to everything, and probably closer to their families as well. So the next thing is rental demand and security. So we're going to get really good short-term rentals in this complex and in this suburb, which I'll delve into later, but as well in the long-term market, we're going to have really, really good strong demand. And the strongest vacancy rate I've seen in the last many, many years is right now in Fitzroy, 0.6% vacancy. If you know Surrey Hills and think that is a tight market for getting good rental properties, think of the fact that the vacancy rate in Surrey Hills right now is approaching 2.5%. Fitzroy is 0.6% vacancy rate. What that basically means is there's nearly no new properties to rent. And when they are, they disappear in a week because the demand is so strong and the supply is so little. So exactly what we want to see as investors to fuel future growth. What it can do for us over time, like we referenced in Surrey Hills, was renting for $600, now renting for $1,100. What is a $650 a week property renting for in Fitzroy going to rent for in 10 years' time? How long will it take before it hits $1,200 a week as more dinks are flooding into the area and the real estate in proximity like this becomes more and more precious? So we can see here another example, in 2008, Surrey Hills property, $700,000. 10 years later, running for $1,200 a week with 8% cash cow for the early investor. You can be that early investor by buying in Fitzroy today. So you can see there the types of properties for rent and the kinds of rents they're commanding in Surrey Hills. So Fitzroy has a walk score of 99%, the strongest of any market I've ever worked on in my 10-year career. If you go to www.walkscore.com.au and type in the address of any property, it will calculate the percentile walk score. And what that references is a combination of factors like walkability to, education, transport, jobs, lifestyle factors, a whole array of things to give it a total score. So when we can get 99%, you can understand why people want to live there. You go and buy a property with a walk score of 50%, you can understand why you're going to have problems renting that property because it's not got all the fundamentals of people that pull people in and why they're going to want to live there. So understanding Melbourne and understanding Fitzroy, why it makes sense for us to look at investors, all the context we need. I want to dive into a particular project that we have listed at the moment, which is amazing for investors to explore, not only for growth, but with a spotlight focus on the short-term rentals, how it can make you circa $10,000 a year in positive cash flow using short-term rentals. So located in Fitzroy, you've got this beautiful project called Fitzroy Limited. It lies at 250 Gore Street, which is home to just beautiful tree-lined streets, lots of terrace homes. Recently there was a terrace home in there that set the record for the suburb north of $3 million. So we've got really, really good company around us to help support future growth on our property. So a complex of just 85 apartments, so nice and small. It's low set, wide complex, so not a tower. So owner-occupiers are really going to love this property into the future, which is exactly what we want. There's a range of one bed, one bath, one car apartments from $469,000 for investors to look at, all the way up to about $540,000 as well. So now consider prices what I've just talked about in Surrey Hills, where a property like this would be circa $850,000 plus, and think of a brand new, architecturally designed, well-located property in Fitzroy from 469. Screaming opportunity for the smart investor. It's a really, really good developer. SMA, local group, been in the game for years, got a history as long as your arm on a sheet of paper, and the performance is something you can bank on. Great interiors as well from top designers. So the property is going to be beautiful and give us that point of difference in the market, which is so important for growth and also us looking at short-term rental. It's 1 minute from all of the top dining strips of Melbourne, like Smith Street, Gertrude Street, Johnston Street. The best example to think of is imagine a property that is 75-metre walk in a brand new designer complex from the likes of Crown Street, where we know that there's an absolute abundance of nightlife and activity and aspirational place to live. So you can see here the location of it. Fitzroy Limited, just a short walk. You can see directly north, heading directly south from the project is bang into the CBD. And then also you can see there the open tree-lined space is Fitzroy Gardens as well. So we've got some amazing things all around us. It's close to the university, it's close to all the hospitals, it's close to the MCG, is 20 minutes walk away. It's close to the University of Melbourne. So everything is around to create that compounded pressure and growth we want. So the site stats, 1.5 kilometres from the CBD, 1.7 from the university, 6 minutes, just 6 minutes by tram from the CBD. It's unreal. Carlton Gardens and Fitzroy Gardens, both under 900 metres away. The finishes are amazing, hardwood timber flooring, air conditioning, custom brass tapware and much more. We've got rooftop communal area with fire pit with views to the city, communal barbecue areas, all the sorts of things that your future buyer and then also the short-term renter is going to want to focus on. And see here some of the images. We've got beautiful, beautiful designs. So that 99% walk score is why it makes so much sense for the short-term renter. Beautiful entrance. You can see there from the street what it looks like. It's not a big, high, dense complex. Now, the important thing to note, as I mentioned at the start of this presentation, a lot of developments you cannot do short-term rentals. We've specifically worked with this developer and said, this market is so hot for this, can we do this for our investors? And they've allowed it. So there will be no hindrances in this complex for the short-term rental investor. So you can see there the beautiful designs and kitchens. So think back to the Fitzroy example from MadeComfy and what that property looked like and what your new property is going to look like. You're going to have an edge over anything else coming through to the market for your short term. Beautiful bathrooms, all custom design. So yeah, beautiful, beautiful property, and from 469,000 in a top suburb in what we know is our strongest growing capital city. Makes sense. So MadeComfy did a specific analysis on this property for the purpose of short-term rental to give us some of these results. So you can see here, the long-term market was around about just over $400 a week for the long-term rental. So still not bad. We're talking about a 4.5% gross rental return on the property for long-term. But where we can see the jacked kind of returns we can expect, MadeComfy 70% occupancy, 26,000. If we can really get some really good results from the team and get 90% occupancy, we can look at figures of $34,000 cash flow. So nearly double that of doing long term. So crazy, crazy results. Speaking with the MadeComfy guys, they said what you can realistically expect is a figure of around 75 to 80% occupancy. But I'll dive into the detail now of what the actual cash flow for an investor will look like. So just some of the things to consider here, looking at 70% occupancy, they do everything in terms of analyzing when you're going to have low occupancy, the shoulder of both low and high occupancy, and give you the accurate figures to explore. Now, fees is the first question that we always get asked with MadeComfy. Typical management fees for long-term is about 6.6% plus marketing and all sorts of things. The MadeComfy crew, they charge a 20% plus GST fee, which includes cleaning and then the management of the property, whether it's getting rented for 1 week or getting rented a new short-term thing every single day as well. So really, really good rate considering what it includes, and then they take care of all of the work for you. And the rents are so high that the 20% plus GST is justified to still spit out a massive, massive net rental return for us as well. Something else to consider is your short-term renter is going to want like Wi-Fi. So there's some other costs in there. You've still got to cover the strata rates as the investor and the council rates, and then something like internet as well as an additional, and then the water usage is covered by you as well. But what that means is some really, really crazy gains. The total costs, the net incomes we can still expect being 34,000 is just amazing, amazing cash flow. That's 10,000 plus cash flow in year one per annum. So what does it look like? I took both examples of a 70% occupancy and a 90% occupancy, and using my cash flow software, I did a bit of an analysis on what it would actually mean for the investor in terms of, per annum and even down to per week, what kind of gains it can get you. Now, this takes into account, what interest rate you're paying, the loan to value ratio, stamp duty, ongoing costs in terms of strata, everything. So it's a really, really good cash flow software that I can help any individual buyers out there when we get chatting after this. If you have some custom details and want to do 80% LVR and so on and so forth, we can have a fiddle with this to give you a customized cash flow as well. Amazing tool for investors to understand what they're looking at. 70% occupancy. Now this was based on a 90% LVR and investors putting in a 10% cash deposit and covering stamp duty with cash and LMI as well. Interest rate is perfectly normal at about 4.5% in this, and you can see there that after you utilize depreciation benefits for tax, you get $8,343 back in your pocket after holding this property for 1 year. So nearly $10,000 positive cash flow to put back into the offset account or go and invest elsewhere, so on and so forth. So absolutely ideal. So we talked about the growth we're going to get on this kind of property, but now we can talk about getting positive cash flow as well. Is an absolute winner for investors. 90% occupancy, well, again, as you can imagine, even better. The depreciation doesn't become so much of a factor at this point in time because the cash flow is so strong. You can see that the gross rental return is a whopping 10.1%, leaving a net rental return of 6.7%. So awesome net rental return. You really can't replicate in any sort of trading fronts at the moment. So it's and then in conjunction with the growth you're getting is a winner for investors. So over $13,000 year one after tax. So 7.8% gross and 5% net for 70% occupancy, 10.1% gross and 6.7% for 90% occupancy. Let's take a halfway point. We can be expecting around about 8.5–9% gross rental returns on this asset, being conservative and taking a middle of an 80% occupancy analysis. So unreal cash flow that for the investor is going to help do exactly this. You take a look at this basic graph. The axis on the left is the loan amount, the time down the bottom in years. The typical property will have a loan life of 25 to 30 years, depending upon whatever you do with your broker. And that's typically what a pay down period looks like until that loan is fully amortized and the loan is paid off over that period. What this kind of property with these kinds of cash flow gains can do for us, either by putting it back into the property and paying down the loan, or potentially just utilizing an offset account, which is a smart idea, it can help the amortization period be drastically reduced on a property like this to 15 or 20 years. Now, if you're good at saving and you're getting this great kind of cash flow as well, you can be doing that in 10 to 15 years. Imagine owning a property like this, which potentially in 10 to 15 years has doubled in value, but then is also unencumbered and giving you circa $30,000 to $50,000 a year in pure cash flow. That's a kind of property that's actually going to help us replace our income as investors, which is just unreal. It's the actual golden result of being a property investor, and this is the exact property that can help you do that. And so where is this kind of property potentially headed? Here's the most recent sale in a suburb, in a street of Surrey Hills. That is really, really a good example compared to what I just showed you, Fitzroy Limited. $920,000 for a similar size, one bed, one bath, one car property. Similar sort of finish, $920,000. I just showed you real estate that makes more sense for the whole market, makes more sense for where the suburb is and the potential it has for cash flow from $469,000, nearly half of what this property is selling for. So you get the idea of why it's starting to make some sense. So this is what's going to happen over the next 24 months in Fitzroy. The market there has minimal stock, both listed and coming to the market. Foreign investors, it's too tough for them at the moment. It's encouraging less stock development from suppliers. There's a shortage of stock at the moment. These 4.5%, 5% gross rental returns for long term will soon become 6%. In 10 years, might be upwards of 10, exactly like what we saw in Surrey Hills. Vacancy rate is insanely tight, 0.6%, tightest in Australia. Investors are slow in the market at the moment due to lending, which encourages less new stock as well. Only the good developers are getting through, only the good development locations are coming through because they've got good local demand. This suburb, this complex, Fitzroy Limited, there's only about 5 one-bedroom properties left for investors to look at because the local market absolutely just ate it up, because good real estate and good locations is rare. Melbourne's massive undersupply is coming to the market fast. Existing stock's going to become more expensive because there's not enough of it. The auction market wants your property at settlement, which is exactly what we want, and the demand's going to continue to grow in the short-term rental space, as you know what we saw in the last 6 years, a 50% increase to Australia from international visitors. Why Fitzroy and Fitzroy Limited? Melbourne's hot, very strong core fundamentals in general in terms of the macro approach. Demand's on the rise, supplies cutting off drastically. Heritage and Collingwood and Fitzroy, that pocket of town to the northwest of the CBD, is really restricted due to Heritage restricts the future supply there. Vacancy rate 0.6. It's Melbourne's cultural food and beverage heart, which is only going to get more and more popular and in more and more demand. So perfect for us short-term renters. Demographics, the best absolute boiling pot of the right demographics, both in renters and future buyers. And the yields are 4.5 for long-term and 7 to 10% for short-term rentals. It's just unreal. To get that same kind of gross rental return, you'd need to go to a really highly speculative mining market. And what kind of growth are you going to get on that property? Realistically, for the most part, potentially going to go backwards. So, let's be smart about it. Location of the CBD, hospitals, universities, and major businesses makes true sense. Genuine owner-occupier demand for the property. And then what I haven't mentioned yet is the best part. This complex, Fitzroy Limited, is due for completion roughly mid-2020. Construction starting before the end of the year. For these remaining one-bedders, working with the developer and highlighting the short-term ability of them with groups like MadeComfy, we've been able to negotiate a 5% deposit for investors and also a free furniture package. So to do short-term rental, you need to normally fork out and get a furniture package in your property. This is going to be saving you anywhere from $12,000 to $15,000 cash by getting a free furniture package, and your property is going to be ready to go to get that short-term rental absolutely cranking from day one. So we've talked about a property that makes sense for growth. We talked about a property that makes sense for short-term rental. We know who's going to take care of it for us. MadeComfy, we know what it costs, and we know exactly what kind of dollars we can get in our pocket per week from buying this property. So what's next? If you own a property and already want to know about short-term rentals, have a chat with the MadeComfy team, just let us know. If you want to speak with myself about a consultation about this particular property, be quick to register your details, let me know, reach out, and we can have a conversation about how you can reserve one of these apartments. There's a beautiful, beautiful display located on site, but not for long because construction's starting soon. You can book a tour, go down, check it out, see what the kind of finishes look like. And I guarantee you'll love what you see. If you want to speak to someone about finance as well, just reach out. We can put you in touch with the right people. But yeah, that's it from me today. We've talked about a beautiful property. We talked about a market that makes sense. We talked about what short-term rental can do for you, who can help you do it. And we talked about a market that makes really, really good sense for investors to be looking at the moment. There's not much more we can put in front of you. I hope that was really beneficial. If you're wanting to make a move, this is a brilliant choice. Don't hesitate in reaching out. We can have a chat, get you into some A-grade real estate. Thank you all so much. My name is Brendan Latimer from Richardson & Wrench Projects. Hopefully speak to you soon. Bye for now.